Welcome to mmlearn.org. This is the first part of my spiritual journey. My name is Chaplain Marta Peña. I am one of the chaplains here at Morningside. Welcome. This class is called Spiritual Journey, which deals with the journey that we all take on this life, on this earth. Life was intended to be connected. We live life connected, life in relationships. We start in our life connected. A fetus is connected to its mother. Pregnancy ends at the uterine when the uterine attachment is broken. Our first experience of transition, our first journey towards this earth, starts as we are separated and begin the turbulent journey down the canal as we are expelled from the womb. And it is our first, some argue, emotional disturbance that we go through. This is how we all start our journey. We start out attached in a nice warm womb where life is kind of calm and normal. And then we have a separation and a journey turbulently as we are expelled, as if to say, welcome to the world. Separation at birth is necessary. It is necessary for the continuation of human life. And life, from that point forward, is one big transition. Another word for transition is change. We are ever changing, ever evolving, ever being renewed. We are transitioning. Life is meant to be lived as a transition, attachment and separation. Our lives are full of attachment and separation. We start out life attached, and then we are separated. It is necessary for our survival and our life to be attached, to have attachments. But attachments to any one thing does not last forever. And so eventually there comes separation. We were created to be connected. Not only do we start connected in our lives, and then once we are born, the immediate thing that a newborn baby does is it's put into its mother's arms. And there is a very important process that goes on. It is the attachment, the bonding between now a baby and the physical mother on the outside. The attachment of the baby to its parents. And then soon they learn as children to grow and walk. And then they spend the rest of their life trying to separate from their parents. Teenagers spend their life trying to spread their wings and fly and be their own person. Parents often struggle with this as children grow up and leave the nest. That's what we call empty nester syndrome. We were created to be connected not only physically, but spiritually and emotionally. Every attachment that we have in life is a physical and a spiritual and emotional attachment. And it's not compartmentalized, for we are a whole being, a whole person. And so this is how one begins their life and one continues their life. Now, the spiritual end of this is that the first not good, and I will speak from the Christian perspective here, but it has meaning no matter what faith journey you're on. The first not good was that Adam should be alone, that man, Adam means man in Hebrew, should be alone. For God did not create us to be alone, but created us to be connected. He created us to be connected to Him, connected to the earth. And then He said, but He needs another connection. And so God created a partner. And the partner was where we were created to live interdependent, to live and be good stewards, and to live and support one another, and to live in and through relationships. There is no life outside of relationships and connection. There is no life without transition, and there is no life without grief and loss. Because eventually, once one is connected, one must be separated. Each of us inside have a desire to be loved and cared for. It is fundamental to our human nature. And our capacity to love and to be loved is the remaining mark of God in us. For God loves us. The image of God is the ability to be loved, one said, and to be good stewards. And so as we go through this life, we live in a transitional state in which we form attachments and in which those relationships, because they do not last forever, end. In our lives, we experience the joys of an attachment, which is always uncomfortable. When you think of a new couple first getting married, that first year is often the hardest transition, because even in good things, it is very, very difficult to get used to being and living with another person. It creates a transition. Then two people live together and they form their lives, but because attachments don't last forever, there eventually to all relationships comes an end. And to this, we have a hard time when it comes time for the separation. Our life is lived in full circle. We are not meant to be isolated and to live on an island of our own. We are meant to be connected. And there is importance in the connection of others. Our spiritual journey is a relationship with one another. Our relationship starts with our parents and then goes to friends and to a spouse, maybe, children. We live the full circle of relationships. And these relationships give meaning to our lives as we develop as a person. The one most important person in my life was my grandmother. The love and the nurture that I got from my grandmother, that relationship benefited me through my whole life. The love and the spiritual nurturing that I received from her, it was foundational my entire life. When my grandmother died when I was 16 years old, that was my first experience of separation. I did not deal very well with that. I had a very, very hard time thinking that my grandmother was no longer able to be there for me. I found it very difficult to say goodbye. I often had dreams that I would see her in a mall, and we'd always go shopping at that point because I was 16. And I'd be running through the store, "Grandma, Grandma, it's me," and I'd never quite catch up with her. It's funny how years later, about 10 years later, when my grandfather died, and we were burying him right next to my grandmother. And I stood there, and they uncovered the hole, and I looked down in the hole, and I knew next to that hole was and I thought, that's not my grandmother. But there was closure in that moment. My grandmother lives in me. And then there was my little girl. Her name was Teresa. She has the exact name as my grandmother. And she traced her name, Teresa, with her finger. And she said, "Mommy, this is me." And I realized at that moment that the love that I experienced from my grandmother, that because of that relationship, because it is not good for us to be disconnected, It is good for us to have relationships and be connected. That love continued on. That love that I received continued on in my little girl. And now she bears the name of my grandmother, and the love she gets from me. It's a cycle that continues to grow. That's why we were meant to be in relationship. And all of the pain that I had experienced and all of that separation was a journey that I was working through. It's funny. I have rings. These rings are my grandmother's rings. They were given to me after she passed away, about 5 years after. And I was in the hospital room visiting someone who was very, very ill. And they asked if I'd pray with them, and I grasped their hands, and we said a prayer together. I looked down at my hands, and I saw my grandmother's hands, and I saw Christ's hands, and I saw my hands. And I realized that relationships go on, that the connection and the relationships we have in our life, the relationships with our parents, with our children, that love continues to grow and form us. And even those relationships that didn't turn out as well as my grandmother's, and we all have those relationships have helped form me and my spiritual journey as we grow. That I learned through the diversity and the failing of those relationships about the significance of relationships and connection, and how what we learn grows with us as we evolve and renew and transition into new people. And it's funny, I hear sometimes at Morningside, our older adults, they have to sell their homes. They have to downsize considerably. And one time I heard somebody say, well, it's only stuff. And I thought, no. Inside of me, I wanted to scream, no, it's not just stuff. If it's somebody's home where they raised their children, where they grew, there's an emotional attachment to that physical stuff. There is a separation and a grieving process that's going on here. It's like my grandmother's rings. They don't mean a whole lot as far as money-wise. I mean, I may be able to get a couple of $100 from them. Somebody stole them from me. They may only be able to get a couple of $100. But they have value and meaning for what they represent. They represent the emotional and spiritual attachment that I had to my grandmother. That is no different for an older person who feels a certain attachment to an object or their house because of what it represents.